Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Jefferson County's meeting with the Jeffco School Board members, Susan Miller and Paula Reed. We are so glad that you were able to join us tonight. My name is Christina Manthe, and I am the president of the Jeffco League. For 102 years, the League has been about interacting with government and educating the public about government. The Jeffco League has been advocating on educational issues since 1954. Our position is to support quality education. We also support good governance. As a voter, in order to support good governance, I must listen to and study carefully the policies and procedures being proposed by the government officials in order to properly evaluate the proposals. We know that school boards are under attack by those who do not care to listen. We also know that attempts are being made to place people on school boards with radical agendas that may not support quality education. We have witnessed outrage expressed toward school board members regarding their policies and procedures on whether they provide quality education or not. Movements to replace current boards are also formulated in Colorado and throughout the United States. The League does not support this lack of civility and looks to voting, not recall, as the voice of the people. As members of the League of Women Voters, it is our responsibility that we reach out and support school boards that provide quality education and practice good governance. During this meeting, we are asking our membership to listen closely for opportunities to support quality education issues and good guidance. I'm going to now turn the meeting over to our moderator, June LaCrone.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see all of you here. I'm going to give you a little bit of basic information about the school board before we start our questions. So the Jefferson County Board of Education is the policy-making body of the school district. Its powers and duties are set by state law. The board is responsible for educational planning and evaluation, staffing and appraisal, school facilities, financial resources, and communication. So that's a lot. The board acts as a court of appeal for staff members, students, and the public on issues involving board policy or implementation of that policy. And the board appoints the district superintendent. The board is currently composed, it's always composed of 5 members. Currently, all of them are women. And those members are elected to alternating 4-year terms. Elections occur every 2 years. Board members serve at large, but represent a specific area of the county, their representation district. Board members are not paid. They give freely of their time to serve the community. After each school board election, the board chooses its officers for the next 2 years. If a vacancy occurs, the board names an appointee to serve until the next election. And our current school board members are Stephanie Schooley. Did I say that correctly? Okay, and she's the board president. Her term ends in November of 2023. Mary Parker is the first vice president. Her term ends November of 2025. Susan Miller is our second vice president. Her term ends November of 2023. Danielle Varda is the treasurer. Her term ends 2025. And Paula Reed is the secretary, and her term ends in 2025. So that is our current board. We have 2 of our members here this evening, Paula Reed and Susan Miller. And so I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I'd like for them to tell you what area they're from, why they wanted to serve on the Board of Education, and what issue they believe is of particular importance for us to know about. So let's start with Susan.
Great. Thank you all very much for having us this evening. And thank you for the League of Women Voters for always putting a forum forward for people to have a conversation that is engaging and important for us to have that type of conversation back and forth. I am from District 4. My district high schools that I represent, just to give you kind of a sense of where I am, is Open School, right down the street from where I live. I also have Lakewood, Bear Creek, Jefferson, and Alameda articulation areas in my district. I have 4 children, navigated the Jefferson High School or Jefferson system. All 4 of them are farmers, graduated from Wheat Ridge over the course of 5 years. And we had children that attended Kiffin Elementary School, Creighton Middle School, Evergreen Middle School. We had one that did start at Lakewood High School and then joined his siblings over at Wheat Ridge. So we had a wide variety of touch points in the Jefferson area, finding the right spaces for our kids, which I think was very important for us as parents and as a family. I ran actually to improve academic achievement for our students here in Jefferson County. I also focused on financial stewardship of our $1.4 billion annual budget, as well as our $750 million capital program. I also wanted to focus on pathways for students that would include not only college, but also career tech, as well as opportunities in the military and other ideas for apprenticeship and mentorships to keep our children here in Jeffco and be part of the community. I also wanted to focus today now, when you ask about what is critical now. Today, we are just as a critical point as we were 3 or 4 years ago, but maybe a greater sense of urgency in my heart. We have to really be focusing on the learning losses that our children have experienced, particularly our most vulnerable students, through this whole COVID pandemic. With the recognition that prior to the COVID pandemic, 54% of our 3rd graders were not on reading levels, and they did not meet that ELA standard. We had 65% of our 6th graders did not meet math standards prior to COVID, and 62% of our 8th graders did not meet state science standards. This is a particular focus for me because I know that when we have the 21st century, which is so extremely competitively globally, we really need our children to be able to thrive and be competitive in this global economy. And so that's what I'm very much focused on for the next 18 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And Paula, we'd like to hear from you now.
So I'm Paula Reed, and I represent District 2, and so that's mostly the Mountain and West area schools. I have Green Mountain and Golden, and all of a sudden I'm drawing blanks here, Evergreen, Conifer, and Warren Tech. I grew up in Jefferson County. I graduated from Pomona High School. My husband graduated from Green Mountain High School. Our 2 children graduated from Green Mountain High School. So very long time roots in Jefferson County. I also taught at Columbine High School for 30 years. And it was mostly English and language arts. I also taught or coached forensics and debate, competitive public speaking. And I also taught in a program called ACE, Alternative Cooperative Education, which was an at-risk intervention program. That was 20 of my 30 years at Columbine. So I've taught pretty much every kind of kid that there is to teach. And I am very invested in education across the board. I was always the kind of teacher who really bonded to my students. And so I really do think of students as whole people. I understand that they have mental health needs. I understand that they often come to school with trauma. I understand that not every kid comes to school from the same place, socioeconomically, culturally, even in terms of their understanding of their investment in education. And so those are all things that I bring with me when I sit down at the board table. I also bring with me the concerns and the hopes and the fears of educators. I felt like it was really important to have the voice of an educator on the school board. I don't think the school board should be run exclusively by educators because there's so much that goes on in a school district, and I've learned even more about that since I got onto the board and understanding just what a massive undertaking the whole thing is and all of the aspects of the business. But first and foremost, we are educating children. And so it just made sense to me to have the voice of someone who educated students for 30 years. One of my big concerns is the fact that we're having a really hard time attracting and retaining high quality teachers. We're having a really hard time getting young people to go into the profession. And so we have college professors in teacher education programs saying that we're starting to reach a point where we're really going to have a crisis in bringing in educators. So that is something that is really important to me. Making sure that our students see themselves in their education, making sure that they see teachers who look like them at the front of the classroom. And that means that we need to attract and retain a diverse workforce. They need to see their culture and their culture's history reflected in the curriculum, be that literature or history or contributions to science and mathematics. And so I think that that's an important piece of curriculum. I think students feel more invested in learning and in the curriculum when they see themselves reflected in it. As with Susan, I think that our students' achievement is really, really important. That is what we're here for. We're here to help kids achieve. And that may look like a lot of different things. Susan did a really great job of mentioning all of those things. College is certainly part of that, but career readiness is part of that. Being able to go into the military, looking at a lot of different options for once they graduate. How do they want to contribute to their society? And how do they want to make their living and build their lives? So I think those things are all very important. When I talk about attracting and retaining quality staff, we don't just have issues with that with our educators. That's also an issue in food services and bus drivers and paraprofessionals. So across the board, we need to look at ourselves as employers and say, what are we doing to make ourselves the kind of place that people want to work and want to stay? And that's becoming more and more competitive. The great resignation, really kind of the great renegotiation, as workers start to say, you know what, my work environment matters to me. And the work environment of the people who are with us is the learning environment of the students. So those are all super important things. Obviously, in terms of things that are crucial right now, funding is huge. And it's been good to see efforts to get rid of the negative factor and to make up for the negative factor, the ways in which our state has been deliberately short funding our schools. But we really need to have our leaders talk about the impact that things like Tabor have had on our ability to fund our schools. It's reaching a critical point. So those are all, I think, some of the biggest issues.
Okay, you've started us off thinking about a number of things. We appreciate that. We're going to get into the questions now. So I think we'll start with Paula for the first question. And the question is this: what are your thoughts about the polarization and divisive behavior at school board meetings and on school property? And how are you protecting yourselves and school staff from intimidation, harassment, and threats?
Well, first I have to say, and we have spoken about this as a board, how very grateful we are to be in Jefferson County. I think that people have certainly been passionate at school board meetings, but my experience so far as a board member has been that by and large, people are civil at our school board meetings. And I know that that hasn't always been the case 100%, but I think for the most part, it has been that way. I think it helps that our board gets along really well. I very much enjoy working with everyone on the board. And I feel like we listen to each other with respect. And my hope is that the fact that we model that for the community, that we can bring diverse points of view to the board table, and maintain good working relationships is setting a tone for the rest of the community. I've spoken from the board table asking our community to please think about how they speak about people they don't agree with in front of their children, because the children bring that to school with them. And that was specifically around masking. And I have to say, the feedback that I'm getting for the most part from our school leaders is that our students are getting along well together, even though they don't all agree together on this issue. And the position that students have on it is literally as plain as their faces. And yet they are able to accept each other and to get along. So I'm hoping that we continue to foster that. Now, having said that, there have been some issues. We did have to shut down a board meeting and make it so that the public could not attend because of a threat made to the school district against the superintendent and school leaders. And after that particular meeting, we were supervised on the way to our cars from the sheriff's department. We have an amazing person who is in charge of our security, John McDonald, and I absolutely trust him thoroughly. So I really do trust him to make the plans to keep us safe and to keep our schools safe. I know he takes that very seriously. So I think that we can continue to see that while periodically passions may be high in our district, we will continue to see a tone of civility.
Okay. Thank you, Paula. Susan, what would you like to say about this particular question?
I think I echo a number of Paula's points. I would also say that over the past 12 years, I mean, this intensity that we're experiencing with COVID is certainly present in our boardrooms across the country. But I would say in Jeffco, we have seen over the past 12 years where frustrated and angry people have come to board meetings and they've brought their passion to those meetings. And I can say that I've worked with other boards across the country where those passions have risen and simmered as well, not just in results of COVID, but for other issues. And so I really think we have heard voices from across the political spectrum over the years, and I will always, always defend their right to speech. I think we do have to be careful about restricting any type of speech. The First Amendment is the cornerstone of our democracy. And so with that said, that's not to say that all speech is protected, right? We don't incite violence. We don't call fire. Those things are not acceptable in our buildings and in our public meetings. And so we as elected officials, I think, walk that fine line and remember that we are public servants, not just to those with whom we agree, but we also need to listen to those with whom we may not always agree with on specific issues. I think Jeffco has worked really, really hard during this COVID time in relationship to, as Paula mentioned, John McDonald and other staff members to make sure, one, that we are safe in those meetings, as well as making sure that we do have community members that are able to come into conversations. We started with those Zoom meetings at the very beginning. We tried to figure out how to just keep the community with us. I know some districts were not as flexible in that space initially, but I think Jeffco tried really, really hard to make sure that our community was still engaged with us through these past 18, 24 months when we were in person and out of person and in person and out of person, et cetera. So I think we believe that we need to continue to honor the public forum and hear the community's voices with, as Paula mentioned, respect, honor, and civility, so that we can hear different voices. And maybe our minds might be changed because of those voices that are heard. So I think it's critical we keep those avenues open and channels open with our community.
Thank you so much. I think both of your ideas will help us remember how we all need to behave in all of our public meetings. So thanks so much. Our second question is this: What do you see as the role of public schools in a democracy, and how will you defend that role? What are your thoughts about the recent legislation, the Senate Bill 21067, Strengthening Civics Education Act? And Susan, would you answer that one first, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I've worked with Ashley Berner from Johns Hopkins University in the work that I do with the school districts, and she's one of our national leaders in the area of improving civics education. And I'm extremely strong supporter of rich civic education, starting in our primary years. Public education, I think, is a critical component for strengthening our civics education and engagement with our students. And it doesn't just stop right after graduation. We know that it's important, that's a lifelong process, and that we must continue to defend and support that effort. And I must say, my husband and I went to see Hamilton this past weekend, and it was a reminder of how fragile our democracy is, and that we must really defend it with every fiber of our soul. So I am a very, very strong supporter of a strong civics program. I will have a nuance, however, with the 21067, and part of that legislation talks about donations may be used to pay for the cost of development of high quality curriculum and inviting different speakers to come in. I think we need to be careful about where we're attracting dollars from and for what purpose on a variety of the spectrum of politics. And we need to be really ensuring that the foundation that we're providing for our students for the civics education is grounded in the Constitution and our federal papers and the Declaration and all of the founding documents that we have, and how they have changed and evolved over time through legislation and the political process that is our democracy.
Thank you. And Paula, what would you add to that?
Well, I absolutely agree with Susan. I just think that a strong understanding of our civic framework is really important for students to have. And Jefferson County has really, required American government for as long as I can remember. I took it when I was a ninth grader. I worry sometimes that people forget what they learned. And so definitely it is something that people need to continue to engage in and sort of remind themselves of how a democracy works. I like the fact that this particular legislation calls for the review of preschool through elementary and secondary education standards every 6 years, because I do think that needs to be updated. And I think that the earlier that we start to engage students in an understanding of their country and how their country works and their importance as citizens and the importance of their participation is really important. Education is absolutely the cornerstone of our democracy. You need a well-educated electorate, and I think that we can never forget that. And this is why I tend to get really dismayed when I see things that I view either as a tax on education or as negligence. I think the way that we have funded our schools in Colorado has been negligent. I look at legislation. We have House Bill 22-1206 before the legislature, and I think it sounds great on the surface. It's an anti-discrimination piece of legislation, but then it includes things like we can't teach that an individual by virtue of the individual's race, ethnicity, or sex is inherently privileged. And I don't know how you teach the formation of the Constitution that originally did not provide universal suffrage, and that originally stated that Black people were not full people, they were 3/5 of a person. You have to be able to talk about the fact that, to start with, this country did specifically get founded to privilege certain people. And this is something that we've been working on. One of the great things about America is that we don't have to stay with mistakes that we've made in the past, and we can grow and we can get better. And this is why it's important for people to constantly be engaged in the democratic process. So I absolutely think it's important. I think it's important that we face our structures and our history honestly, and I think our students can handle that.
Okay, thank you both. Those were very thoughtful answers. Our next question. What are your thoughts of the renewed focus on state accountability tests in this pandemic environment? How can the state accountability test be used to target academic needs? And I know that's not an easy question. Susan, would you answer first, please?
Sure. So I am a very, very strong supporter of state accountability tests because I believe that they provide taxpayers with comparable data on an annual basis so that they can evaluate the return that they are getting for the billions of dollars that we are spending on education in the state. However, those summative tests are very different from the formative assessments, such as MAP, that our teachers are able to use. Those are the measures of academic performance, and those provide immediate feedback to teachers as well as to parents about their students' academic strengths, as well as areas of need for improvement or strengthening. And moreover, some districts have purchased, for example, a module from NWEA, which is the company that provides these assessments, with links with detailed MAP results actually to Khan Academy, so that Khan Academy, which is a free source for kids, can actually address those math modules that those children have need for strengthening and improvement, and those extra supports are readily available. And so that's a great link of a company that links with an open source that can support children at de minimis cost for us as taxpayers. And then I also think that this is an issue that does confuse people about the difference between what is a summative assessment like CMAS versus formative assessments such as MAP. They both have a purpose and they are both to be utilized thoughtfully and carefully, but they do serve a purpose from a system-wide perspective as well as then from a intimate differentiation point for students and for teachers and their parents of students.
Okay, thanks so much. And Paula, what are your thoughts?
I am not a huge fan of standardized tests in terms of accountability. Because there are so many issues that go on with those tests that can make it so that they're not giving you always the best data that is available. That said, I do think that they're very good for identifying trends. And I think that you need to know those trends so that you know what schools need what supports, what students need what supports. And so it's not that they don't have a place. I just don't know that using them for accountability is such a great idea. I can see an awful lot of problems using them as part of teacher evaluation. There are so many elements. As a high school teacher, I'm looking at all of the years of education that students had before they came to me, plus the time that I have them, plus the fact that they have 5 other teachers during the day. So I think that can make it difficult. Again, I think that you can see trends. I think if you're looking at it and you've got a particular teacher who's consistently not showing growth in their students in the same school that other teachers consistently are showing growth in, that is one indicator that there might be issues with that teacher. I promise you there are other indicators as well, and that evaluators have already noticed whatever it is that's going on there. So as accountability, not so great. As a trend identifier and as something that helps you decide where to place resources, I absolutely think that they have a place.
Okay, thanks so much. The next question. In times of strained financial resources and personnel, How can you effectively handle special programs? And what is the effect of those resource-heavy programs on the greater need? Paula, will you take this one first?
So I have to admit, when I looked at the question, I was having sort of a tough time defining special programs because there are so many of them. There are certainly some special programs that are required by federal law. So students who have IEPs, those IEPs have to be, we have to be in compliance with those, and we have to make sure that students are getting the instructional supports that are in those IEPs. And not just because of federal law, but you have a moral obligation to those students. Every child should be getting what they need in order to be able to achieve in school. But there are also a lot of other programs that we do for students. I am a firm believer that every single student is entitled to art, music, and PE. I think that those are fundamental building blocks of being a human being. And we want our children to have those things. And I think that extracurriculars are very important. I know that athletics help many of our students stay motivated in school, and they learn teamwork, and they learn leadership, and they learn fantastic things. I coached debate for 17 years, and I can tell you that those students, I also was a competitive speaker when I was in high school. That program is something that shapes people for the rest of their lives. And students who come back in their 40s and tell me the ways that that is still impacting their life. And so we do need to be able to provide those things for students. And again, this is where I come back to, we really need to be funding our schools better than we do. There are lots of other states that do a much better job of supporting their schools than we do. We're toward the bottom in terms of our school funding. And it's those resources that are just critical to making sure that every student has those opportunities. Right now, you kind of have to prioritize. So IEPs are going to get priorities. They need to. Students who are falling behind in reading and need extra help with literacy, we absolutely have to take care of that. Those fundamental building blocks have to be there. But I don't want us to be cutting art, music, and PE for that. I don't want us to be cutting extracurriculars.
So more money would be helpful, is what you're saying.
Super helpful. I think just understanding that these things are part of education. They are not, they're not condiments. They're the main meal.
Okay, thank you very much. Susan, what are your thoughts?
One of the questions or the clarifications is what is actually what you're calling a special program? What is a comprehensive education experience that you want for your children, which I think Paula outlined in terms of your core curriculum, and then your arts and your special add-ons that really make that whole experience for the child, the education experience we want for our kids. And so special programs to me, when it first came up, would be something such as like a Fletcher Miller, right? That's a very, very focused SPED program for those students that have great need. And we have a moral obligation, as cited by Paula, to make sure that we support those families and those students. And that's an immense challenge that those families face on a day-to-day basis. And I'm so thankful that Jeffco has such a program for students. And I know when I've gone to Fletcher and my children were what you would call TAs for the Fletcher Miller School, but for the grace of God, go I. I mean, that's a great program that I could not even imagine Jeffco not supporting. And so I think we have to be careful about what we're saying is a special program versus, what's the category? And I also think we have to be talking about those Title I programs, as Paul mentions. Some of these are federal mandates. We can talk about unfunded federal mandates that have come down that we are subject to, as well as to state unfunded mandates that really would be great if those are mandates, we fund them fully as envisioned in those legislation. So I think those unfunded mandates would be at the state level and the federal level. I think you're asking a school district to backfill programs that really should be funded according to what the legislation was intended to do. And so in that sense, I think that's the ask I would have of our state and feds is if you're asking these special programs to be set for Jeffco to be accountable for, we'd like the financial support to address that. Because then what happens is when we don't have that, other parts may not receive the financial support that is needed to make them robust and great experience for students. I think Jeffco does a very good job trying to stretch our dollars as best as we can. And I think we have another conversation coming up with a question that you're going to ask in just a little bit that we can have a more robust exchange, hopefully. But I think, thinking about what are special programs versus what, as Paula mentioned, what is a core experience for a kid, I think we need to be careful how we define those.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to clarify a couple of things because I know we have some people who are with us tonight who may not be familiar. IEP stands for Individualized Educational Program, and that's typically associated with special education funding. But I'm also not familiar, having not lived here that long, I'm not familiar with Fletcher Miller. What is that?
Fletcher Miller is the special ed high need school right down here in Lakewood that really supports children that have extensive physical as well as mental needs in order for them to get their education. And so there's a lot of different types of physical supports, education supports that take care of that very special population.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that for all of us. Okay, what do you see as the greatest challenges the district faces in the next several years? Susan.
Sure. I think the reality that we are seeing across the country, as well as what we're seeing right here in the Front Range and in Colorado in general, is declining enrollment. And with declining enrollment, we have therefore declining financial, we'll have financial pressures in response to that declining enrollment because we are funded on a per pupil basis. And so as we start to look at what we are providing, once again, going back to Paula's point of what is it that we want to be providing to our children as an overall education experience, how do we do that with declining resources? And we have to be very thoughtful about how we move forward in that direction because we're going to be facing the academic needs. Our kids, improving academic outcomes, investing in reading curriculum and math curriculum, et cetera. And we only have so many dollars. So we have to be thoughtful about how we spend those dollars and how we invest wisely.
Paula, what would you like to say about that?
Well, one of the things that the board is really taking on right now is along the lines of what Susan said, and that is that we are defining for ourselves what is a thriving school. What should every child get from every Jefferson County school? And then how do we effectively manage our resources to make sure that that is the case, that we don't have schools that are getting shortchanged. And how do we best work with that? So I think that is a big piece of it. I also think that along with declining enrollment, we have declining staffing. We don't have enough bus drivers. We don't have enough food service people. We don't have enough paraprofessionals. The things that I talked about earlier. And some of that is salary for sure, and compensation. And those are pieces that we certainly have to look at. And it's difficult because even the smallest increase in compensation for a group of people in this district is a major expense because we do employ so many people. So, so that is something that we have to be thoughtful about. Also, we need to be looking at how can we work on work-life balance for our educators who are feeling overwhelmed. How do we make education look to young people? Because here's the thing, our students are watching their teachers get stressed to the max, and they're listening to our society speaking ill of teachers. And really, you know, kids in Douglas County are watching teachers' cars get leafleted with insulting pamphlets. Why would a young person want to go into a field like that? So I think that if you work on that work environment piece, that can help balance a little bit. You know, if we can't be right up there in the top of what we provide compensation wide, but we can make sure that our teachers feel valued and respected and that their time is valued, that can make a real difference. I'm not sure exactly what the answer is on some of our other pieces, like bus drivers and, you know, people who if you've got a commercial driver's license, you can make really good money doing other things for sure. It does at least allow a more steady, probably more family friendly schedule than, say, an over the road trucker. So I think those are things that we certainly can play up. But yeah, compensation and work environment so that we have the staffing that we need, and so that young people look at this and go, yeah, education might be something that I would want to be a part of.
Okay, thank you so much. What do you see, excuse me, how can the league provide support and be of help to the Board of Education? Paula.
Well, I think what you're doing right now is huge. I think the more that people hear from their board members what is going on in our schools, the more they understand how important our schools are and what they themselves need to do when it comes to who they support and who they vote for and what they ask of their leaders. So I think that is absolutely critical. I also think any organization that can and is willing and is appropriate to work with schools is terrific. And so, for example, we do have an American government class, and I think they would probably love to have guest speakers from the League of Women Voters who talk about their own experiences as voters and why they think this is so important that they continue to be part of a civic organization that is devoted to democracy. I think that is also something that can be really helpful. You have wonderful forums for people who are running for school board. I was fortunate enough to participate in that. And I think it is really wonderful that people get a chance to make an informed decision. And again, I think the other nice thing is it does allow for an opportunity for people to see the board in a less formal way where, you know, for example, Ms. Miller and I can sit here and chat with you and look more human, I think, sometimes than we look at the board table, and maybe feel better about the people who are running the school board. They can see that that Susan and I are both really passionate about education, that we both put kids at the forefront of our decisions and what matters to us and our priorities.
Okay, I'd like to follow up on that. If league members wanted to participate in classroom discussions, who would we contact? Do you have any idea who that might be?
I would speak directly to the American government teacher.
Okay, so go directly to the school.
Yes.
Okay, thanks very much. Susan, what would you like to say about how we can help?
Well, I think you have heard from Paula as well as from me some of the challenges that we face. But as a governing board, we are also, and as elected officials, we're accountable to you all, right? We are accountable for the job that we do. And so I hope that through these forums and through conversations and reaching out to board members as well as keeping us accountable for the work that we have to do, which is the competency of educating our children, and making sure that that's the work that we're doing and that we're improving constantly. That's our job, and that you don't accept any excuses from us, because our whole work, as Paula said, is focused on our children and great outcomes for kids so that they're able to thrive in the 21st economy. And that is really what the board is accountable for. We direct the superintendent takes that direction. And I would hope that the direction that the board constantly is giving the superintendent is, how are we making it better for our children, for the experiences that they have, for our staff that works with our kiddos as well. So hold us accountable. There should be no excuses as to why we should not be doing great things for our kids and continuing to improve.
Thank you very much. Appreciate both of your answers on that. I'm going to ask another couple of questions while people are putting questions into the chat. So here's a question I'd like to know. What support programs are in place for teachers? And I'm not sure which one of you would like to take that. Paula, are you aware of support programs for teachers?
So we do have something called the Employee Support Program, and it does provide support for teachers. They can go and discuss, whatever issues they're having confidentially, and have some assistance in solving problems or just feeling generally supported. We do have our employee associations, and those associations negotiate compensation. They can and have come to the superintendent and the board and said, here's what's going on. For example, they came to us and said, teachers are really stressed out and really feeling like they just do not have enough hours in the day to do their jobs, to do their planning, to do their grading, and to do the things that they need to do in their own lives to take care of themselves. And given the unbelievable stress of this year and the fact that the last 2 years have been extraordinary in so many not so awesome ways, we did go ahead and open a memo of understanding and some negotiation around giving them a couple more planning days this year. So I think that we are trying to be responsive to the issues that they are having. There's a lot that still needs to be done for sure. And I think some of it is just, we need some stability, and we need to not have the pandemic causing all of these issues, and that's beyond our control to some degree. But in the meantime, these are some of the things that are available to them.
Oh, I think we all understand about the pandemic. Susan, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I think there's a couple other things that some leaders within our buildings are working really faithfully towards to support our teachers. And one anecdote is today I was visiting Arvada K-8 and then as well as North Arvada Middle School with the restorative practice program. And they were talking about not only what they were doing with their children through restorative practice programs, but also the idea and concept of how do we take that work and potentially bring it to our staff as well. Because I know that, as I think Paula and others would echo, we have mental health challenges that we've been trying to fill, hard to fill spots for mental health professionals. And so how can we, start to build programs that can potentially put a basis in line where our children can be supportive and we can start to learn from that and also work with our teachers to build those types of relationships. We also have professional learning environments or groups that have been started with different schools. I think, Paula would probably talk about what her professional learning group was at Columbine. And I know that I've talked with principals at Belmar as well as Mulholm and other places where they're really trying to put PLCs together, professional learning communities together that can provide work back and forth between teachers so that they understand, hey, how is this working in your classroom? How can I use that in my classroom? How can we learn from each other? And able to provide that time that is critical for teachers to have that opportunity to talk with each other. And I think that we also need to be thinking about candidly across our economy, we have had a lot of companies that have gone through stresses. I know my company, half of our people are gone in the past year and a half. And that work that now is on my shoulders and other people's shoulders, I'm sure there are many people on this conversation this evening that are going through that as well. So having a little bit of grace for each of us, our teachers, our families, our parents, our students during this time, and support each other, I think is critical. So that we understand we're all coming from different experiences and coming out of COVID, how do we come out stronger together with this?
Okay, and I have another question. What is the district doing about staff shortages? Paula, do you want to start with that?
So with our classified employees, we are offering bonuses for people who are coming on new. And we are also offering bonuses to our classified staff who recommend somebody to come in to be hired. So they get compensation if they help to recruit new people. So those are a couple of the concrete things that we're doing right now.
Susan, you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I think I really would like to give accolades to our administrative staff as well, who've stepped up and said that they would take on substitute jobs. So we have more of our central offices that are teachers that have been teachers in the past are substituting and coming forward. I also want to give a shout out to our parents that have stepped forward and signed up to be substitutes. We had, I think, close to 98 parents sign up back in the autumn when we were really struggling with substitute teacher requirements and needs. They put in their papers, and the state was helping to kind of move those processes along at a little bit faster pace. I think there are still some parents out there that are still waiting to be accepted into the substitute pool. But I think that's one of the things that our parents and our community really stepped up and said that they would be more than willing to try to help in any way, shape, or form. I think there's also legislation out there right now that is looking to provide for those that have been teachers in the past and because of para have not come necessarily back into the workforce, but now there's going to be potentially, if passed, a window of time where those individuals could come back and help support the work that's being done and needed in our classrooms. And I am amazed, and kudos to, once again, to our staff at all of the buildings that are working really hard to cover each other because of people being out unexpectedly. I tested today and I might be sick, so I'm gone. They've been great about covering. And I know it's stressful. We're all kind of operating under that pressure, but I've really it's been wonderful to see how Jeffco community has worked really hard, I think, to do our best to step up and work together.
Okay. Do we have any more questions, Christina? All right, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, we do. And as of course, since we're experimenting a little bit tonight, some of the questions haven't come through quite as clearly as we would like them to me. So hopefully we've gotten everything. The first question I have is, what are the factors contributing to declining enrollment?
I'm happy to answer that initially, and then Paula, I don't want to step on your toes if you'd like to step forward, but I think, we have seen this, it's not something new, right? So when we look at enrollment on the Front Range in general, we have seen a decline over the past 5 to 6 years. So this is not something that is unexpected. We can go back 6 years or 7 years ago and know that this was coming at us. COVID just helped to jumpstart some of it a little bit. We saw people pulling back, going into homeschooling and deciding that was the way they wanted to go. We saw people deciding to go out of state and move entirely. And once again, as I said earlier, we're not unique. We can look down to the Springs area and see what has losses down there. Look up at Portland, over 20% of their students have left Portland schools. So the challenge for us, I think, is yes, we might have declining birth rates, and if that's a factor, how do we retain those children to stay within Jeffco? But we also need to be thinking about, how do we become that school district of choice? How do we become that school district that people are drawn to, that they want to come to, so that we are not just at the quote unquote mercy of birth rates in Jeffco, but that we are really the public school district in the Front Range that people want to send their children to because of the great experiences that they have and the great teachers we have. And that, to me, we can worry about the declining enrollment, or we can embrace the opportunity to figure out how do we become the best in the Front Range.
Paula, did you want to add something?
I think Susan did a great job of really covering the elements other than birth rates in terms of what is pulling students out of schools and what we really need to bring them back and to have them stay here in Jefferson County. But I do think that in terms of birth rates, one of the issues that we have is it's becoming really, really difficult for young people to live in Jefferson County. It's hard to find affordable housing. My daughter and her fiance are hunting for houses right now. And as you know, people in their mid-20s looking for a place to live, every single house that they have looked at has been bought out from under them so fast, a lot of times by investors. And so I don't know whether we need to look at growth initiatives that we've had, or whether we need to look at the regulations that we have around building high density housing and liability with that. But boy, we need to figure out something to make Jefferson County an affordable place for young people to live and to raise a family. So I would say that's another piece of it that's not really in the school board's control, but is very much a realistic part of Jeffco's environment right now.
Absolutely. The league is working on housing affordability issues as well. So it all ties together.
Yes, very much so.
Do we have other questions?
We do. How, Paula, I'll direct this to you first. How can the average Jeffco parent help eliminate Tabor funding in Jeffco schools aside from voting?
Get rid of Tabor, and only the voters can do that. So that is going to take grassroots organizing to get that done. And I think some of that is also something that we should be asking our leaders to do, to be more straightforward with people about the damage that that particular amendment is doing to a lot of aspects of our quality of life. And I think if they would help raise that awareness for people, then we might be able to get that grassroots movement going. In the meantime, there are things that cities have done to debruce whatever legislative means that we have to try to free up funds for schools would also be helpful. And honestly, I offhand don't have that exact mechanism, but it would be helpful.
Susan, did you want?
I don't have much to add to that. I think that is something that the education formula, the school finance formula is something that has been a struggle for the past decade or more. I know different people have gone at it at different ways, and I think, as Paula mentioned, that's in some ways beyond the scope of what we as board members are able to do. I really look to our legislative leaders to be thoughtful about really how best to be funding schools, and how best those mechanisms or those levers, shall we say, that we pull can really be brought to the forefront, so voters really do understand the trade-offs of what one piece of legislation was meant to do versus what it's actually potentially doing, and the risk assessment associated with that. So I know that's kind of a cagey way to answer the question. I don't have that mechanism, as Paula said, to pull those levers. That's really at our state level to be accountable for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. How is Jeffco implementing full-day kindergarten and preschool opportunities during this COVID challenge time?
Who'd like to answer that?
Well, I'll start, and then Paula, I'm sure will fill in where I may not be as familiar. But the kindergarten, right, has been fully funded, and so for those who want to go to kindergarten, they are able to go to kindergarten and attend full day. So there is that opportunity, and that was provided by the state. For pre-K, that's a different ball game, right? In terms of where it can be located within Jefferson County in terms of the space that can be provided. I know that there have been challenges in some of the neighborhoods where they'd love their children to be going to the school where their children are going for elementary, but yet that school may not be providing pre-K. So that's a challenge, I think, that we need to be thinking about as full funding or more funding for pre-K comes to fruition. But I think that's a challenge that all districts in Colorado are going to be facing is, one, do we have the space for it, the appropriate space, because there are certain physical elements associated with pre-K that you need to have in place at your schools and in your classroom in order to address the educational needs and requirements for pre-K education. So that's something to be thinking about in terms of facility standards and whether or not Jeffco is prepared across our elementary schools to meet those different standards. And I don't have that answer, but I think just because we're not filling all of those pre-K spaces, or that we're not having pre-K in every single building, would be a flag to me to say, why not? Or do we not have the human resources to meet those needs? I would also say that we have seen, going back to enrollment, that pre-K and kinder fell off over the past 18 to 24 months. And so some people are saying, oh, I'm going to redshirt my kindergartner. I'm not exactly sure what that means. But, I'll wait. Well, that's fine. And that's good. But that, that kind of puts a bubble. We'll have to see how that all shakes out in terms of bringing our children along through the pre-K, kinder into first grade wave, shall we say. But that's something for us to be watching, because once you bring your children into pre-K and you keep them in kinder, then they're more likely to stay at the elementary school. So I think we have to be very cognizant of what those trends are going to be looking like after COVID.
And Paula, did you want to add something?
I think again, Susan's covered it very thoroughly. I do have one caveat, and she may know this better than I do because she's been on the board longer than I have. But my understanding was that while Jared Polis did require full day kindergarten, the state did not necessarily fully fund it. That may have been one of those unfunded mandates that you spoke about earlier. But I don't know for sure. I'd have to look.
Okay, something to investigate.
Okay, next question. No starting teacher in Jeffco can afford to live in Jefferson County. What are you doing about that in your efforts to recruit and retain? What other barriers are there? What supports are in place for teachers and other staff of color and diversity?
Paula?
Very long question.
Paula, your thoughts?
There we go. I just wasn't able to unmute there for a second. So we are actively recruiting from historically Black colleges and other programs that can help us to attract teachers of color. We have to be able to retain them, of course. And so our HR department has been working with small groups of new teachers of color to sort of find out, you know, like what are they encountering as issues as they settle into Jefferson County? What are things that we can be doing to be of greater support to them? We are working with the Jefferson County Education Association and a group that they have, EMOTE, the Ethnic Minority Organizing Team. Had to think about what that meant for a minute. And they are kind of engaged in that particular activity as well. What can we be doing better to really retain our teachers of color and make them feel comfortable here and make sure that they know that they're valued and that what they have to offer is important to us, because it is. In terms of the affordability, so we do what we can with compensation. If we had more money, we could compensate better. And then there's the cost of housing, over which we have no control. Now, there are some areas of the country that have done some things. In fact, I even think Aurora might have one. Aurora or Denver has started a program where they've got a building that has lower priced apartments for teachers. That's not something that we've worked on, but we have so much on our plates right now that I hesitate to say, yeah, and we'll do that too. But it would be nice to see that be enough of a priority in the county that the county might jump in and help figure out if there's any way to try to mitigate the cost of housing. But with so many cities in Jefferson County with growth caps, we're just going to keep having these housing shortages that make it really expensive. So those are pieces of it. If there are ways that we can help teachers mitigate some of the cost of just becoming a teacher, there really aren't very many professions where you pay as much to do an internship, essentially, as you do in education. You pay full tuition to a college so that you can go work full-time as a teacher to learn how to be a teacher. And I don't think that that is necessarily the only way that we can do that or the best way that we can do that. It can be very expensive to take the tests that are required. And some of those tests really do need to be taken more than once. If you're taking the history praxis, you don't necessarily know what area of history it's going to focus on. and history is big. So you might be an excellent history student and have everything you need to be a fantastic history teacher. And you just happen to hit the time that the praxis covers a period in history that is not your forte. You take it again, it focuses on a different era, and you do much better. So there are all of these barriers that we put up economically to become teachers. And that is, again, something that one school district can't take care of that. But we could decide, I think, as a state, that we're going to do some things to mitigate that. And that especially affects teachers of color, because there is so often a correlating socioeconomic component to that. So I think it's a partly a school district problem, but it's also a bigger problem.
Susan, did you want to add anything to that?
You know, I remember going back, I want to say 8 or 9 years, when I was sitting on the Diversity Council, and I remember Amy Weber, who was the Director of Human Resources at the time, came and spoke with us about how people go about applying for school district jobs and what that looks like. And one of the big questions from the Diversity Council was how do we attract a diverse population to work in Jefferson County, and how do we ensure that, as Paula said earlier, I think today, different people are in the front of our classrooms and more students can see themselves in those teachers and or people that are working in the buildings, et cetera. I think as Ms. Weber was very thoughtful, she said, you know, I can't be looking specifically for different colors. That's not what I'm allowed to do under, under the employment regulations. I have to be finding the person that has the experience and the background that we've set forth in what we're searching for a job. So keeping that in mind, and then hearing what Paula is saying, which is, hey, how do we think thoughtfully about the assessments that teachers have to take in order for them to be qualified to meet potentially the standards that I'm asking in the job description? That seems to me to be something that we should be thoughtful and thinking about. And so I had not really heard what Paula just described as a barrier. And that's really something I think makes sense to explore and find out why that is the case and how we might break down those barriers. So I thank you, Paula, because I did not know that. And I really appreciate that context. In terms of economically, being able to live in Jefferson County with a starting teacher salary, I'd love to pay starting teachers more. I think that would be great. And I think it would provide a greater, universe of people that might apply to be teachers because of higher compensation coming into the workflow. I know all of my children so far that have moved on into the work world have had, for 3 years or 4 years, they've lived with roommates. And so I think we have to be thinking about, what it is that the expectation is when you get right out of college for working, and where you choose to live. And that management of those expectations, if I'm earning this amount of money, and I want this kind of lifestyle, I might have to roommate with somebody for a year or two. And Denver is one of those areas that just is, attracting a lot of people from outside of our state, and people are coming here to live the Colorado lifestyle. And with that, they come and bring, competition for housing spaces. So I think we have to deal with who we're attracting to come into Colorado and why, and then also realize what our limitations are in terms of salaries and what we can pay. And I know that's a kind of a Gordian knot for us to be thinking about, but being Denver and being attractive, that's one of the challenges we're going to be facing for a while, I think.
Okay, thank you both. Christina, do we have time for more questions?
I think we have time for one more question. Maybe two. Given the current levels of reading proficiency in elementary schools, is the board entertaining the idea of recommending a single district directive reading curriculum that has proven successful at other district and state schools?
No. I was on that sidewalk that said we needed one. That's all we need, just one. However, having somebody kind of confront me and say, no, that's not the right answer, and explain why. So for example, there's wit and wisdom, there's interreading, there's expeditionary learning. There are different types of curriculum that we need to be looking at that can be leveraged for our students that are in schools, and of providing principals the ability to figure out which of those programs really works for their kids. And the reason it's not just one, we're a school district of 78,000 students, and we have a variety of kiddos across the spectrum of learning, and how do we best provide the curriculum that's really going to support their needs. Some walk into kindergarten reading Harry Potter. Some walk into kindergarten with a limited vocabulary. Some walk into kindergarten speaking a specifically different language. And so I think we really have to be thoughtful about the curriculum that we use and addressing students where they are, and making sure that they have a rich, robust curriculum readily available that's going to support their needs. And so right now, the board, as of last spring, was looking at 3 or 4 different curriculums. We have one that is a kind of a larger test case, shall we say. I think it's gone out to maybe 20, 22. Don't quote me on that, but it's a larger universe of elementary schools. And then we have some that are doing wit and wisdom, and we have some that are doing, I can't remember the other one, but there's like 3 or 4, expeditionary. So we have 3 or 4 that we're testing right now. And then the district is going to have to decide, okay, which one is it that we're going to really invest in and do the professional development, while still allowing other schools that have found that the wit and wisdom is really the one that is best for their students. And we provide for them to have that opportunity. What we don't want to have is something less for kids, that they're not getting the great learning experience. So I think it's a yes and kind of scenario where we want to make sure we have great options for kids, but allowing for flexibility for schools that have found something that's really working, that their kids are just thriving with that curriculum. I don't know if that answers the question directly, but yeah, that's where we are.
Paula, did you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I would add is that all of the curricula that we are looking at they are evidence-based. Mm-hmm. And they do have as a foundation that science of reading,
right,
and the understanding of the importance of phonics. So there are certainly common elements of things that are evidence-based as good strategies for teaching early literacy.
That is very helpful and good to know. Christina, I'm thinking, since I know that Susan has another meeting right at 8:00, we should maybe do a little wrap up. And since we've asked so many questions of each of you, I'd like to give you both the opportunity just to make a closing remark, whatever you'd like to add to this. So Susan, we'll let you go first.
Thank you. Well, once again, I really appreciate the opportunity to have this forum. I think the one thing that COVID has provided for us is the opportunity to gather together like this in a timely fashion, where people are not having to drive all over Jeffco to join in a conversation, and they just know it's this window of time, and that we can all be together in this type of forum. It's not as wonderful as pressing hands or breaking bread, but it is certainly a great opportunity to have the conversation. I do want to thank everybody who came this evening. And I hope that the conversation was informative. And I know it's kind of one way when questions are asked and it's not really a dialogue, but I love the dialogue and I appreciate people asking questions, and please feel free to reach out to me on our website, on the Jeffco website. I'm happy to engage, and we may not always agree, but I find that that's where I learn the most, is from people that have been giving me information, or, hey, have you thought about it this way? Has really helped me be a better board member. I came in with a certain lens, and that lens has changed and evolved over time because people have engaged with us or engaged with me. And so that's really important to me and to the work that I have for the next 18 months. So I really hope that continues. And I hope whoever's on the phone tonight or in the Zoom call will step forward and talk with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And Paula.
We had 48 people on this call tonight.
Oh, no, Paula can, we don't want Paula to have a chance to give her closing remarks.
Well, I too want to thank everybody for being here. All 48 people. That is phenomenal. I appreciate this opportunity, and I really appreciate the fact that people were generous enough to put me into office, because this has been an incredible experience already. It's important work. It's satisfying work. I am so glad to be able to do it. And I am very glad to be doing it with the people that I'm doing it with. I hope that one of the things that you see tonight is that we are a board that works well together. That I feel like Susan and I can speak and just sort of build on what each other says. And really that's what our board conversations have been like in my experience so far. So it's just incredible. And I encourage people to get involved in their local forms of government, whatever that is that appeals to you, whether it's city council or whether it's the school board, or if you don't want to be at that level, being involved in your school accountability committee and your PTAs and those kinds of organizations as well. But I just genuinely appreciate this so much, and the questions were fantastic. And as Susan said, I think the other thing that's really important is do reach out and talk to us, because I have found the same thing that she just said, that I came in with a very certain idea of how I saw things, and I've already seen my thinking evolve in the few short months that I have been on the board. So what you say to us does not fall on deaf ears. We think about it. We bring it to the discussions that we have, and we welcome your participation.
Thank you very much. And you have just led me to what I want to say, which is how you can participate in school board meetings. So correct me if I have the wrong information, but I believe that the regular board meetings are at 6 p.m. on the first Thursday of the month. And so your next meeting will be on March 3rd. It says you can watch meetings live, online, or view a video or audio recording of past meetings at the website, jeffcopublicschools.org. And study sessions are 3 p.m. on the Wednesday following the regular board meeting. Is that correct? Okay, good. So the Jeffco League of Women Voters is reconstituting its Observer Corps so that we can stay informed about actions that are being considered by this school board and other elected boards. So any of you listening tonight, if you're interested in being on the Observer Corps for the Jeffco School Board or other local or governmental groups, contact me or any member of the League board. And I'd just like to thank you again, both Paula Reed and Susan Miller. I have learned an awful lot. Also like to thank the other school board members who are not here. And I would really gratefully like to thank all of the teachers and all of the support staff, because I know it's been a really challenging time. And as a former educator, I really learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you everyone for coming tonight, and particularly Susan and Paula, thank you for spending time with us. Our work to defend democracy and empower voters never takes a break. If you have not yet joined League, please consider doing so. You can do so by going online to lwvjeffco.org to join. And we have a lot of volunteer opportunities for people who might want to make a difference. Please consider volunteering. You can contact June or myself to find out about volunteering opportunities. And thank you guys for coming tonight. We appreciate it very much. Have a wonderful evening.